Okay, so you're getting ready for that big LPN exam, right? And I know nutrition can feel like a whole lot to cover.
It really can be, especially when you think about all 12 chapters.
Exactly. So we're calling this a deep dive, kind of like your final review session before the test. We're hitting the high points, those key things you absolutely need to know about nutrition, not just to pass, but to really be prepared for working with patients.
And what's amazing is how these chapters build on each other. We start with the basics, like what are nutrients anyway? Then we get into how they work in different situations, different ages, all that.
Right, it all connects. It's not just memorizing facts, it's understanding the why. So are you ready to dive in and make sure you've got this knowledge locked down?
Let's do it. We're starting at the very beginning, Chapter 1. Principles of Nutrition. Back to basics.
All right, chapter 1. So first things first, right? Food, it's more than just, tasty stuff we eat. It's like fuel for our bodies, and it provides the building blocks for our cells and tissues. And if we're missing certain things, those essential nutrients, the things our bodies can't make on their own, well, that's when we get into trouble.
Absolutely. We can end up with deficiency diseases.
Exactly. Like, remember scurvy? That's from not enough vitamin C. Or beriberi. That's a thiamine deficiency.
It's incredible how each nutrient has such specific roles.
Right. And there are 6 main classes we need to know. Carbs, that includes fiber, then protein, fats, those are our lipids, vitamins, minerals and electrolytes, and of course water. Can't forget water.
And of those, 3 of them give us energy, those calories we always hear about. Those are carbs, fats, and protein. Yeah, but they don't all have the same calorie count per gram.
Right. That's a big point for the exam. Carbs and protein, they give you about 4 calories per gram. But fats, they're more energy dense, coming in at around 9 calories per gram. Okay, that makes sense. Fats are more concentrated. Now, what about those recommendations we see? Like, how much of each nutrient do we actually need? That's where the DRIs come in, right?
Exactly, the dietary reference intakes. They were developed by the Institute of Medicine, and they're really important for a few reasons.
Yeah, I remember learning they help figure out the nutrient needs of whole populations, and they're used for things like food programs, like SNP benefits.
That's right. But for you, as a future LPN, they're also super helpful guidelines for understanding how much of each nutrient your patients might need.
Makes sense.
But here's the thing. The DRIs aren't just one number for each nutrient. There are actually a few different values within the DRIs.
Oh, right, like the RDAs. I always think of those as the amount you should aim for each day.
Yeah, the recommended dietary allowances. They're set to meet the needs of most healthy people and help reduce the risk of those chronic diseases we want to prevent.
Okay, but what about if there's not enough research to figure out an RDA?
That's when they use the AI, the adequate intake. It's kind of an estimate based on what seems to be enough for healthy people.
Got it. And there's that upper limit too, right? Like how much is too much?
Exactly. The UL, tolerable upper intake levels. That's the maximum you can probably have without any bad effects.
Safety first. And don't forget the AMDRs, those percentages.
Yes. The acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges. That's where we see the 45 to 65% of your calories from carbs, 10 to 35% from protein, and 20 to 35% from fat.
All right, I think we've got those key terms down. Now let's get specific. Let's talk carbs.
Carbs. Chemically, they're made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. That's where we get CHO. And their main job is providing energy. Think of them as fuel for our bodies.
Our brains run on glucose, right? Which comes from carbs.
Exactly. The brain needs at least 130 grams of carbs a day just to function. Of course, most people eat more than that.
And those carbs play a role in how we use protein and fat, too. Like, if we eat enough carbs, it spares protein.
Right, the protein-sparing effect. The body doesn't have to break down protein for energy, so it can use it for things like building and repairing tissues.
Okay, that's good to know. Now, what about the different types of carbs? We've got the simple sugars, right?
Yes, those are our monosaccharides, like glucose, fructose, and galactose. Glucose is the body's primary energy source. Fructose is the sugar in fruit, and galactose is part of milk sugar.
Then there are disaccharides. Those are 2 simple sugars linked together.
Exactly. Sucrose is a good example. That's table sugar, glucose, and fructose combined. Lactose is another one. That's the sugar in milk, glucose, and galactose. And then there's maltose, which we get from digesting starches. That's 2 glucose molecules.
And then the complex carbs, those are the polysaccharides.
Right, like starches. Those are long chains of glucose found in grains and root vegetables.
Yeah.
And then there's fiber, which is also a polysaccharide. But it's indigestible. It comes from plants like whole grains, fruits, and vegetables.
So how does our body actually use those starches?
Well, our digestive system breaks them down into those simple sugars, glucose that our cells can absorb and use for energy.
And fiber, what happens to that? We don't digest it, right?
Not really, but it's still super important. It adds bulk to our stool, so things move through our digestive system more easily.
So it helps with, regularity.
Exactly. It also can lower cholesterol levels and might even reduce the risk of certain cancers.
Wow, fiber is a real multitasker. And it helps keep blood sugar steady, too.
It does, by slowing down how fast sugar gets absorbed. Now, the recommended amount of fiber is about 25 grams a day for women and 38 grams for men. And even though we don't fully digest it, some of it gets fermented in the colon, which gives us a tiny bit of energy, maybe 1.5 to 2.5 calories per gram.
So even fiber contributes a little bit. Okay, let's move on to protein. What determines how much we need?
A few things, actually, like if someone's growing a lot, like kids and teenagers, or during pregnancy.
Makes sense. They need more building blocks.
Right. And the quality of the protein matters, too. A complete protein has all the essential amino acids our bodies can't make.
Oh, yeah, there are 9 of those essential amino acids.
Exactly. And any illness or injury can increase protein needs, too. The body uses it for repair.
So what's the recommended amount?
For healthy adults, it's about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. That translates to roughly 10 to 35% of your daily calories coming from protein.
Okay, but what happens if we don't get enough protein?
That's where we see protein energy malnutrition, or PEM.
And in really severe cases, that can lead to conditions like kwashiorkor or marasmus.
You're right, those are serious conditions. And don't forget, protein also provides energy, about 4 calories per gram, just like carbs.
So it's a dual-purpose nutrient. It builds and provides energy.
Exactly, but its functions go way beyond that. It's the building block for every tissue in the body. Muscles, organs, skin, hair, nails.
It's pretty much everywhere.
It also keeps our immune system strong, helps regulate fluids and electrolytes, and it's crucial for making things like enzymes, hormones, antibodies. Even breast milk, mucus, and sperm need protein.
Okay, that is a lot of responsibility. It's definitely an essential nutrient. Now, let's talk fats, or lipids. What's the deal with those?
Well, most of the fat we eat, about 95%, is in the form of triglycerides.
Triglycerides, those are the ones with glycerol and 3 fatty acids.
You got it. They're a big energy source. They help transport those fat-soluble vitamins we talk about, and they get stored as body fat, which provides insulation and protection.
So are all fats the same?
Not quite. We have saturated fats, mostly from animal products. Those are usually solid at room temperature. And then there are unsaturated fats, which are mostly from plants.
I've heard those are the healthier ones, right?
Generally, yes. They can be monounsaturated, like olive oil, or polyunsaturated, like omega-3s from fish.
And we got to watch out for those saturated and trans fats. They're linked to heart disease and other problems.
Definitely. Too much saturated fat can raise cholesterol and increase your risk. But there's one exception: babies under 2. They actually need more fat for brain development.
Interesting. So there are times when more fat is actually better.
Exactly. But on the flip side, if your diet is too low in fat, like under 10% of your calories, that can lead to problems too. You could end up deficient in those essential fatty acids your body can't make.
And it can make you really unhealthy, even lead to that wasting condition called cachexia.
Right. It's all about finding that balance. Now, how do fats get digested? Most of that happens in the small intestine.
Right. I remember that the gallbladder releases bile to help break down those fats.
Exactly. The bile emulsifies the fat, so it's easier for the pancreatic lipase to do its job.
Lipase is the enzyme that breaks down those triglycerides into smaller molecules so they can be absorbed.
And then we have lipoproteins, which transport fats and cholesterol in the blood.
Like LDL, the bad cholesterol, and HDL, the good cholesterol.
You got it. LDL carries cholesterol to tissues, which can build up and cause problems, while HDL carries it away to the liver, so it can be removed from the body.
So it's kind of like a cleanup crew.
Exactly. And let's not forget that fat is the most calorie-dense nutrient, packing about 9 calories per gram. So it's a really efficient way for the body to store energy.
Makes sense. We need to be able to access energy even when we haven't eaten for a while. Okay, now it's vitamin time.
Vitamins. These are organic compounds that are essential for all sorts of reactions in the body. They're like little helpers, making sure everything runs smoothly.
And we need 13 different vitamins, each with its own special job.
Right, and we categorize them based on whether they dissolve in water or fat. The water-soluble ones are vitamin C and all those B vitamins.
And the fat-soluble ones are A, D, E, and K.
Exactly. Now, vitamins themselves don't give us energy in the form of calories.
But we need them to be able to use the energy from carbs, fats and protein, right?
That's exactly it. They're essential for that whole energy metabolism process.
All right, let's start with vitamin C, also known as ascorbic acid. It's a busy one, involved in lots of processes.
It is. It helps build tissues, like collagen, which is important for skin, bones, and tendons.
And it helps with wound healing too,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And it helps us absorb iron from plant foods and boosts our immune system.
Okay, so it's good for overall health and fighting off infections. And what are some good sources of vitamin C?
Think citrus fruits, like oranges, grapefruits, lemons, also tomatoes, peppers, green leafy veggies, strawberries.
Okay, good to know. Now, what about those B vitamins? There are a whole bunch of them, right?
There are. They're all involved in energy metabolism in one way or another.
Like thiamine or vitamin B1.
Right, that one is especially important for muscles and nerves.
And a deficiency can lead to beriberi.
Exactly, that can cause all sorts of problems, from fatigue and weakness to heart and nerve damage.
Yikes. So we need to make sure we're getting enough thiamine. And where do we find it?
Good sources include meat, whole grains, and legumes.
Okay, good to know. And then there's riboflavin, vitamin B2.
That one helps release energy from food and is important for healthy skin, eyes, and nerves.
And if you don't get enough, you can get problems like cracks at the corners of your mouth.
Right, that's called chylosis. You can also get a sore tongue and skin rashes.
So riboflavin is definitely important. And what are some good sources for that one?
Milk, meat, and dark green leafy veggies are all good choices.
Okay, those are some good staples to have in your diet. Now, what about niacin, vitamin B3?
That one plays a role in energy production, and it's also involved in making hormones and cholesterol.
And I remember that a niacin deficiency can cause pellagra.
That's right. It's a serious condition that can cause dermatitis, diarrhea, and even dementia.
That's why it's called the disease of the 3Ds.
Exactly. And some good sources of niacin include liver, nuts, and legumes.
Okay, those are some good options. And then there's pantothenic acid.
Pantothenic acid is involved in so many processes, including breaking down carbs, fats, and protein for energy. It also helps make red blood cells and certain hormones.
And a deficiency is pretty rare, right?
It is, but if it happens, it can cause fatigue, weakness, and tingling in the hands and feet.
Not fun. So where do we find pantothenic acid?
It's in a wide variety of foods like meat, whole grains, and legumes.
Okay, that seems to be a common theme with the B vitamins.
It is. And next up, we have pyridoxine, also known as vitamin B6.
That one is important for making amino acids, the building blocks of protein.
Exactly. And it's also needed for brain function and red blood cell production.
And if you don't get enough, you can get anemia and nerve problems.
You're right. Good sources of vitamin B6 include meat, poultry, fish, bananas, potatoes, and fortified cereals.
All right, a pretty varied list. And then we have folate, or folic acid.
Folate is crucial for cell growth and division, and is especially important during pregnancy.
It helps prevent neural tube defects, those serious birth defects of the brain and spine.
That's why it's so important for women of childbearing age to get enough folate.
And what are some good sources?
Think leafy green vegetables like spinach and kale, as well as legumes, citrus fruits, and fortified grains.
Okay, those are all pretty common foods, which is good. And then there's cobalamin, vitamin B12.
That one is essential for healthy nerve cells and red blood cell production. And it's also needed to use folate properly.
And a deficiency can lead to anemia and nerve damage.
Exactly. And this is one that vegans need to be careful about because it's mainly found in animal products.
So they might need a supplement. And where do we find B12 naturally?
Meat, poultry, fish, eggs, and dairy products are all good sources.
All right, that makes sense. And finally, there's biotin.
Biotin is needed for healthy hair, skin, and nails. It also helps break down carbs, fats, and protein for energy.
And a deficiency is rare, right?
It is, but if it happens, you can get symptoms like hair loss, skin rashes, and brittle nails.
So it's important for our appearance too. And where do we find biotin?
Good sources include eggs, nuts, seeds, sweet potatoes, and mushrooms.
Okay, that's a pretty diverse list. I think we've got those B vitamins down. Now let's talk about those fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K.
These ones are a little different because our bodies can store them in fat tissue.
Which means we don't need to eat them every day, but it also means we can overdose more easily.
Exactly. And remember, we need fat to absorb these vitamins. So people with conditions that affect fat absorption, like cystic fibrosis or celiac disease, need to be careful.
They might need supplements. And people with liver problems need to be cautious too, right?
Absolutely, because the liver is where these vitamins are stored and too much can be harmful.
Okay, so moderation is key. Now let's start with vitamin A.
Vitamin A is famous for its role in vision, especially night vision.
And it helps keep our skin and immune system healthy.
You're right. A deficiency can lead to night blindness, dry skin, and increased susceptibility to infections.
And what are some good sources?
You'll find vitamin A in orange and yellow fruits and vegetables like carrots, sweet potatoes, and cantaloupe. It's also in liver, dairy products, and eggs.
Okay, a good mix of plant and animal sources.
Yeah.
And then there's vitamin D, the sunshine vitamin.
We can actually make vitamin D in our skin when it's exposed to sunlight.
But a lot of people don't get enough sun, or they live in places where there isn't much sun in the winter.
That's true. And vitamin D is crucial for absorbing calcium, so it's really important for strong bones.
And a deficiency can lead to rickets in kids and osteomalacia in adults, right?
Exactly. And too much vitamin D can cause problems too, like calcium buildup in the blood.
So it's important to find that balance. And what are some good food sources?
Fatty fish, like salmon and tuna, are great sources. You'll also find it in eggs, fortified milk, and some mushrooms.
Okay, good to know. Now let's talk vitamin E.
Vitamin E is a powerful antioxidant, which means it protects our cells from damage.
And it helps keep our immune system strong and protects vitamin A from being damaged.
You got it. Deficiencies are pretty rare, but if they happen, you can have problems with your nerves, muscles, and vision.
And where do we find vitamin E?
It's found in vegetable oils, nuts, seeds, and green leafy vegetables.
All right, some good healthy fats in there. And finally, we have vitamin K.
Vitamin K is the clotting vitamin. It helps our blood clot properly.
So if you're deficient, you might bleed more easily.
Exactly. And it's also important for bone health.
And what are some good sources?
Leafy green vegetables like spinach, kale, and collard greens are excellent sources. You'll also find it in some fermented foods like sauerkraut.
Okay, good to know. And I think that wraps up the vitamins. Now let's move on to minerals and electrolytes.
Minerals are those inorganic elements that we get from our diet. They're needed in all sorts of processes in the body.
And they're everywhere, right? Like in our cells, bones, blood.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we categorize them based on how much we need. The major minerals are those we need in larger amounts.
Like calcium, phosphorus, sodium, potassium, magnesium, chloride, and sulfur.
And the trace minerals, those we only need tiny amounts of, include iron, iodine, zinc, copper, manganese, chromium, selenium, molybdenum, and fluoride.
Okay, that's a lot to remember. And what about electrolytes?
Electrolytes are a special type of mineral that carry an electrical charge when they're dissolved in fluids. They're super important for things like nerve and muscle function and keeping our fluid levels balanced.
And the main electrolytes are sodium, potassium, and chloride.
You got it. Okay, so let's start with the major minerals. Calcium is probably the most well-known. It's essential for strong bones and teeth.
And it helps with muscle function, blood clotting, and nerve transmission.
Exactly. And if you don't get enough, you can develop osteoporosis, which weakens the bones.
And too much calcium can cause problems too, like kidney stones.
Right. So it's important to get the right amount. And what are some good sources of calcium?
Dairy products are the classic source, but you can also get it from leafy green vegetables, fortified foods like plant milk and orange juice, and some nuts and seeds.
And don't forget, vitamin D is needed to absorb calcium. So those go hand in hand.
Right. Okay, next up, phosphorus.
That's another mineral that's essential for bone health.
And it's part of DNA and RNA, so it's involved in cell growth and repair.
Exactly. And it helps with energy production and maintaining acid-base balance in the body.
And what are some good sources?
Dairy products, meat, poultry, fish, eggs, nuts, and legumes are all good sources of phosphorus.
All right, a pretty varied list again. Now let's talk sodium.
Sodium is an electrolyte that's important for fluid balance and nerve and muscle function.
But we hear a lot about how too much sodium is bad for you.
It's true. Too much sodium can raise blood pressure, which increases your risk of heart disease and stroke.
And most people get way more sodium than they need, right?
Definitely. It's mostly found in processed foods like canned soups, frozen meals, and snack foods.
So we need to be careful about those. Now, what about potassium?
Potassium is another important electrolyte that's crucial for muscle function, including the heart.
And it helps regulate fluid balance and blood pressure.
Right. And a deficiency can lead to muscle cramps and weakness, and even irregular heartbeats.
So it's a pretty important one. And what are some good sources?
Fruits, vegetables, and legumes are all good sources of potassium. Bananas, potatoes, tomatoes, avocados, spinach, and beans are some examples.
Okay, those are all pretty common foods. And what about magnesium?
Magnesium is involved in over 300 processes in the body.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. It helps with muscle and nerve function, blood sugar control, blood pressure regulation, and even protein synthesis.
And a deficiency can lead to fatigue, muscle cramps, and even seizures.
You're right. Good sources of magnesium include leafy green vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and dark chocolate.
Ooh, dark chocolate. Okay, I can get behind that one. And what about chloride?
Chloride is an electrolyte that works with sodium to maintain fluid balance and blood pressure.
And it's part of stomach acid, which helps with digestion.
Exactly. Deficiencies are pretty rare because we get plenty of chloride from salt.
Right, that makes sense. And finally, sulfur.
Sulfur is a component of some amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein.
And it's also found in some vitamins.
You got it. Deficiencies are rare because we get plenty of sulfur from protein-rich foods.
Okay, so if we're eating enough protein, we're probably good on sulfur. Now, let's touch on those trace minerals.
These are the ones we only need tiny amounts of, but they're still important.
Like iron, which is essential for carrying oxygen throughout the body.
Exactly. It's part of hemoglobin in red blood cells. And a deficiency can lead to anemia, which makes you feel tired and weak.
And what are some good sources of iron?
Red meat is a good source of heme iron, which is easier to absorb. But you can also get iron from plant foods like beans, lentils, spinach, and fortified cereals.
And vitamin C helps with the absorption of non-heme iron from plants.
That's right. So eating those foods together can be beneficial. And what about iodine?
That's needed for thyroid hormone production.
Right. And a deficiency can lead to goiter, which is an enlarged thyroid gland.
And it can cause problems with metabolism and growth.
You're right. And good sources of iodine include iodized salt, seafood, and dairy products.
Okay, those are some good things to keep in mind. And finally, fluoride.
Fluoride helps strengthen tooth enamel and prevent cavities.
And it's often added to public water supply.
Exactly. But too much fluoride can cause fluorosis, which can discolor teeth.
So like everything else, moderation is key. And I think that wraps up all the essential nutrients.
You got it. We covered carbs, fats, protein, vitamins, minerals, and electrolytes.
And now the most essential nutrient of all, water. We can't live without it.
It's true. Water makes up about 60% of our body weight and is involved in just about every bodily function.
It helps regulate temperature, transports nutrients and waste products, and keeps our cells hydrated.
And we lose water throughout the day through sweating, breathing, and urination.
So we need to replace it by drinking fluids.
Exactly. The amount we need varies depending on things like our activity level, the climate, and our overall health.
But a good general guideline is to aim for about 8 glasses of water a day.
And you can also get fluids from other sources like fruits and vegetables, soups, and milk.
But we should limit sugary drinks because those can contribute to dehydration.
Absolutely. And it's important to watch for signs of dehydration, especially in young kids and older adults.
Like feeling thirsty, having dark urine, feeling tired and lightheaded.
You got it. Okay, so we've covered the basics of nutrition, all the essential nutrients and their roles in the body. Now let's move on to Chapter 2, where we'll talk about what happens to the food we eat: ingestion, digestion, absorption, and metabolism.
All right, Chapter 2, it's all about the journey of food.
That's right. It's a fascinating process. So first we have ingestion, which is just the act of eating, taking food into the body.
Makes sense. And then digestion, that's where things get broken down.
Exactly. Digestion is the process of breaking down food into smaller molecules that the body can absorb.
So it's like turning food into building blocks.
Exactly. And that process happens mechanically, like through chewing and churning in the stomach.
And chemically using enzymes to break down those complex molecules.
You got it. And then we have absorption, which is where those smaller molecules pass from the digestive tract into the bloodstream.
So they can be transported throughout the body.
And finally, metabolism. That's the sum of all the chemical reactions that happen in the body.
It's how we use those nutrients for energy, growth, and repair.
And metabolism includes both breaking down molecules, which is catabolism, and building up molecules, which is anabolism.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about those energy-yielding nutrients, carbs, fats, and protein? What happens to them during metabolism?
They're broken down to release energy, which is stored as ATP, the energy currency of the cell.
And if we eat more than we need, that extra energy gets stored, right?
Exactly. Excess glucose gets stored as glycogen in the liver and muscles.
And if glycogen stores are full, that extra glucose gets converted to fat.
Right. And excess fat gets stored as triglycerides in adipose tissue, which is our body fat.
And what about protein?
If we need more protein, those amino acids are used to build and repair tissues. But if we have enough, they can also be used for energy.
Okay, so our bodies are pretty good at adapting to what we eat.
They are. And the rate at which we burn energy is our metabolic rate.
And the basal metabolic rate, or BMR, is the energy we burn at rest, just to keep our bodies functioning.
That's right. And it's influenced by things like our age, sex, body size, and muscle mass.
So people with more muscle mass burn more calories even at rest.
Exactly. And any kind of stress, like illness or injury, can increase our metabolic rate too.
Because the body needs more energy to heal and repair.
And nitrogen balance is another important concept in metabolism.
That's the difference between the nitrogen we take in through protein and the nitrogen we lose through urine.
And it tells us whether the body is building up or breaking down protein.
Okay, that's a good indicator of overall health. Now, what about assessing someone's nutritional status? What kind of things do nurses need to look at?
Well, you'll want to consider their weight history, any medical conditions they have that could affect their nutrition, their fluid, and electrolyte balance.
And what about lab values?
Absolutely. Things like albumin, transferrin, glucose, creatinine.
Those can tell us a lot about their protein status, blood sugar control, and kidney function.
And don't forget to look for physical signs of malnutrition, like muscle wasting or edema.
Right. And you'll also want to ask about their typical diet, any supplements they take, their alcohol and caffeine intake.
It's really about getting a complete picture of their nutritional habits.
And based on all that information, nurses can then develop interventions to help meet their nutritional needs.
Exactly. It might involve monitoring their intake and output, collaborating with a dietitian, and educating them about healthy food choices.
And sometimes it might mean coming up with creative ways to help them get enough protein and calories.
Right, especially if they have a poor appetite or difficulty eating.
Like adding protein powder to drinks, using whole milk in recipes, or incorporating high-calorie snacks.
It's all about finding what works for each individual patient.
Okay, I think that covers the basics of assessing and addressing nutritional needs. Now, Chapter 3 takes a deeper dive into nutrition assessment.
This is where we really put on our detective hats and gather all the clues we need to understand someone's nutritional status.
It's like putting together a puzzle.
It is. And remember, nurses are often the first line of defense when it comes to identifying potential nutritional problems.
We're the ones seeing the patients day in and day out.
Exactly. And we need to be able to recognize those subtle signs and symptoms.
And then we can collaborate with other healthcare professionals, like dietitians, to develop a plan of care.
A team approach is always best. Now, when we're assessing someone's nutrition, we need to consider all sorts of factors, not just what they're eating.
Right, it's more than just, are you eating your fruits and vegetables?
Exactly. We need to think about things like their medical history, their lifestyle, their culture, and religion.
And their socioeconomic status.
Absolutely. All of these things can have a huge impact on their ability to access and consume a healthy diet.
So it's really about getting a holistic picture of the person.
And one of the best tools we have for that is the diet history.
That's where we ask them all about their typical eating habits.
Exactly. We want to know what they eat, how much they eat, when they eat, how they prepare their food.
And we need to be specific, like how much water do they drink? Do they drink coffee or soda?
We also want to know if they have any special dietary needs, like if they're vegetarian or have food allergies.